What if, among the most celebrated manuscript discovery of the 20th century, scholars pulled something from the caves that the world has never quite known what to do with? In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd threw a stone into a cave in the Judean desert and heard pottery shatter. What he found inside would become known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. 2,000 years of silence cracked open in a single moment, ancient texts preserved in jars, wrapped in linen waiting. The world was electrified, biblical manuscripts older than any previously known. The Hebrew book of Isaiah, virtually unchanged. Hymns, rules, commentaries. The library of a community that had vanished, left intact in the dark for 2 millennia. Scholars descended. Photographs were taken. Translations began. And among the thousands of fragments in caves 1, 2, 4, and 6, they found something that has never made it into mainstream religious education, never appeared in Sunday school curricula, and is rarely discussed even in academic circles outside of a narrow specialization in Second Temple Judaism. They found the Book of Giants. Now picture this. Somewhere in the ancient world, in an unspecified vast landscape, 2 enormous figures wake from sleep at the same moment. Their names are Ohya and Hahya, sons of Semyasa, one of the fallen watchers who descended to earth, took human wives, and fathered children that the earth was never meant to hold. The brothers wake screaming. Or perhaps they cannot scream, the fragments do not say. What they can do is look at each other across the dark and know, in the way that only identical terror can confirm, that they have seen the same thing. Fire, darkness, flooding, the end of everything. They are giants. They have ravaged the earth. They have eaten its food and spilled its blood and committed every transgression that the Watchers taught them. And now they are having prophetic nightmares, and none of the giants can interpret what the dreams mean. And the Watchers, their fathers, are imprisoned and silent and unreachable. There is one person in the world who might be able to help them. One human, Enoch, who has walked with God and been shown the machinery of heaven, who has seen the judgment prepared and the sentence written, and knows how all of it ends. They send a messenger, a giant named Mahaway, to cross the world and find him. Mahaway finds him. And Enoch's answer is the answer they already feared. The dreams mean exactly what they look like. Everything ends. There is no mercy for what they are. Today, we are going to go deep into one of the most extraordinary texts that almost no one has heard of. We're going to explore what the Book of Giants actually says, as far as we can reconstruct it from damaged fragments. We're going to ask why it was excluded from the canon of texts that survived in mainstream tradition. We're going to follow its astonishing journey from the caves of Qumran to the deserts of Central Asia. And we're going to sit with its most radical theological proposition that the condemned have inner lives, that the monsters dream, and that dreaming of your own destruction might be the most human thing anyone, human or otherwise, has ever done. The story of the Dead Sea Scrolls is well known enough to have its own mythology. A shepherd, a cave, a jar. But the texture of what was actually found, the full scope of it, is less widely appreciated than the headline. The Qumran community, most likely a sect of Jewish ascetics called the Essenes, had assembled one of the most remarkable libraries of the ancient world. Their collection included not only biblical texts, but a sprawling array of what scholars call Second Temple literature, writings composed in the centuries before and during the turn of the Common Era, texts that had circulated widely in Jewish communities, but had not been formally included in what would become the Hebrew Bible, the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs. These were not fringe documents for the Qumran community. They appear in multiple copies. They were clearly read and studied and cherished. And among them, fragments of the Book of Giants. The fragments are not large. This is the first thing to understand about this text. We are working with ruins, pieces, edges of sentences. In Cave 4 alone, scholars identified what appears to be 6 or 7 separate manuscript copies, which tells us the text was important to the Qumran community. You do not copy a text 7 times if it does not matter, but the physical survival is fragmentary enough that reconstruction is a scholarly puzzle with many missing pieces. The man most responsible for the initial scholarly work on these fragments was Józef Milik, a Polish priest and Dead Sea Scrolls scholar who worked on the Cave 4 material for decades. Milik identified the Book of Giants fragments in the 1950s and 1960s, but it was not until his 1976 publication on the Enochic literature that he laid out his reconstruction in full, alongside a stunning claim we will come back to. But here is the first mystery worth sitting with. Why, among all the extraordinary texts that came out of those caves, has the Book of Giants remained so invisible in popular understanding? Part of the answer is practical. The fragments are damaged, incomplete, and difficult to reconstruct. A text full of holes is harder to translate, harder to present, harder to explain to a general audience. The Book of Isaiah survived in nearly perfect condition. That is a story you can tell clearly. The Book of Giants survives in pieces. That is a story that requires patience and uncertainty. But is that the whole answer? Is the fragmentary survival of the text really sufficient to explain why it has been sidelined, while other equally fragmentary Qumran texts have received substantial popular attention? Or is there something about what the Book of Giants actually says, something about what it does to the theology of judgment and guilt, that makes it genuinely difficult to know where to put it? Not suppressed exactly, not forbidden, but stranded. A text that survived, that matters, that scholars of serious standing have spent careers reconstructing, and that has still not found its way into the conversation most people are having about this period of religious history. The fragmentary survival is part of the answer, but it is not the whole answer, and the rest of the answer is what this video is about. To understand the Book of Giants, you need the background it assumes. The text is a companion piece to the Book of Enoch, specifically the section of 1st Enoch, known as the Book of the Watchers, chapters 1 through 36 of that longer work. The Watchers are a class of angels, divine beings, assigned to watch over humanity. 200 of them, according to the tradition, make a collective decision to descend to earth, take human women as wives, and have children. The leader of this rebellion is Semyasa. Among the other Watchers is Azazel, who teaches humanity forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, cosmetics, magic, the art of war. The children of these unions are the Nephilim, the giants. Enormous, violent, insatiable, they consume all the food of humanity. And when that runs out, they begin to consume the humans themselves, and then the animals, and then each other. The earth is drenched in violence. The cries of humanity ascend to heaven. God responds by sending the flood. And before the flood, he sends the archangels to bind the watchers and pronounce their sentence, and to tell Enoch what is coming. This is the story as first Enoch tells it. The watchers are villains. The Nephilim are monsters. The flood is justice. But the Book of Giants asks a question that first Enoch never asks. What was it like to be the Nephilim? What happens when you are the child of a crime, born into a world that has already written your sentence before you were ever aware enough to make a choice? The fragments we have from Qumran begin, as best as scholars can reconstruct, with a scene of widespread chaos and violence among the giants. But then the dreams begin. Ohya and Hahya, the sons of Semyasa, are the text's central figures. They dream. The fragments are damaged at precisely the moments we most want clarity. But we can reconstruct enough to know that the dreams are visions of cosmic destruction. Fire, a great garden being submerged, tablets being written, an angel descending with a sword. The giants cannot interpret these visions. They call an assembly. Multiple giants describe their dreams. The assembly debates. There is, in these fragments, a striking quality that can only be called deliberation. The giants argue, compare, try to reason their way to meaning. They are not behaving like mindless monsters. They are behaving like beings trying to make sense of something terrifying and incomprehensible. And they reach a conclusion. They cannot figure this out alone. They need Enoch. This is the moment the text pivots into something extraordinary. A giant named Mahaway volunteers, or is chosen, to find Enoch. The fragments here are among the most damaged, but we have enough to reconstruct something of the journey. Mahaway travels vast distances, by some accounts flying or being carried by the wind, until he reaches Enoch, who has already been taken up and lives at the edge of the world. What Mahaway brings back is not comfort. Enoch reads the dreams. He is, after all, the one human who has been shown the full machinery of heaven, who has walked through the seven heavens and seen the chambers of judgment, and his interpretation is precise and devastating. The fire they dreamed is the fire of judgment. The garden being submerged is the earth before the flood. The tablets are the recording of their deeds. The angel with the sword is real. They are going to be destroyed. Their fathers are going to be imprisoned in the valleys of the earth until the final judgment. And there is no appeal. There is a moment in the surviving fragments that is almost unbearable in its restraint. After Mahaway returns with Enoch's message, Ohya responds. And what survives of his response suggests not rage, not defiance, but something closer to recognition. As if the dream had already told him, and all he needed was for someone to confirm it. Even the monsters knew on some level what was coming, and knowing did not save them. This is the theological territory the Book of Giants enters that the main Enochic tradition carefully avoids. In 1st Enoch, the Nephilim are instruments of violence and vectors of cosmic contamination. Their destruction in the flood is framed as necessary purification. There is no ambiguity, no interior life, no question asked about what it felt like to be them. They are a problem that required a solution, but the Book of Giants gives them dreams. and dreams are not nothing. In the ancient world, in virtually every ancient culture we have records of, dreams were understood as the medium through which the divine communicated with mortals. Dreams were how God spoke to Jacob, to Joseph, to Pharaoh, to Daniel. The prophetic dream was the primary channel of divine communication with humanity. And the Nephilim are having prophetic dreams. This is theologically explosive, and it seems impossible that the author of the Book of Giants did not understand that. To give the Nephilim prophetic dreams is to give them a relationship with the divine. However agonized, however one-directional, however cruelly informative that relationship might be, God is speaking to the giants, not to save them, not to offer them a path out, but speaking to them nonetheless, through the language of visions in the night. There is a strand of ancient Jewish thought that understood prophetic dreams as evidence of the dreamer's significance to God. The great dreamers of the Hebrew Bible, Joseph, Daniel, are marked by their dreams as people God has chosen to act through, to speak to use. What does it mean that the Nephilim are dreaming prophetic dreams of their own destruction? Are they being spoken to, warned, or simply informed? The Book of Giants does not answer this question. It lets it sit, jagged and unresolved, in the space between the fragments. There is another layer here worth excavating, the question of inherited guilt itself. The Nephilim did not choose their fathers. Semyaza and the other watchers made the decision to descend, to transgress the boundary between heaven and earth, to produce children the world was not designed to contain. The Nephilim arrived into existence already carrying the consequence. The text does not explicitly ask whether this is just, but it gives the Nephilim enough interiority, enough searching, enough desperate messengering across the world to find meaning, that the question cannot help but arise in the reader's mind. Can you be guilty of what you are rather than what you chose? The giants did commit violence. The text does not excuse this. Ohya and Hahya are not sympathetic in the way that a wrongly accused innocent is sympathetic. They are beings of violence and devastation. But the question the Book of Giants smuggles past the reader's defenses is more subtle. Even if the violence is real, even if the guilt is genuine, was the sentence already written in the nature they were given before they ever acted? And if so, what kind of justice is that? The ancient Jewish tradition had a sophisticated answer to this question, and the answer was, yes, inherited guilt is real, and its consequences are real, and the flood was righteous. The Book of Giants does not dispute this. It does not argue for the Nephilim's innocence. What it does is far more destabilizing. It makes you feel the weight of the sentence from inside it. And once you have felt that, once you have sat inside the dream with Ohya and Hahya and understood that they know what is coming and cannot stop it, and are trying anyway to find meaning in it, the theological machinery that produces the flood as a clean answer starts to make a different sound. Not wrong necessarily, but not clean. That unclean feeling, that residue of something unresolved, is, I think, precisely why the Book of Giants has had such a difficult time finding a stable home in any tradition. It does not overthrow the theology. It haunts it. And then, just when you think you have located the text's strangeness in that haunting, in that theologically uncomfortable intimacy with the condemned, the fragments offer you something that stops the argument entirely: a name. A name you already know from a completely different world. Gilgamesh, the hero of the oldest surviving literary epic in human history, king of Uruk, 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, the man who fought the monster Humbaba, who killed the bull of heaven, who searched the ends of the earth for the secret of immortality and returned empty-handed to the city he had built. In the Book of Giants, Gilgamesh appears not as a hero, but as a giant, one of the Nephilim. And alongside him is a figure named Hobabish, a name scholars have connected to Humbaba, the forest demon that Gilgamesh defeats in the Mesopotamian epic. What is going on here? The scholarly debate about this connection is one of the most fascinating in the study of ancient literature, and it opens into questions about how ancient texts borrowed from, transformed, and subverted each other in ways we are only beginning to understand. One possibility is that the author of the Book of Giants was drawing on a reservoir of giant lore that circulated throughout the ancient Near East, and that figures from Mesopotamian mythology had already been absorbed into this tradition as exemplars of superhuman size and violence. Gilgamesh, after all, is described in the Mesopotamian tradition as 2/3 divine, a hybrid being, not fully human. It would not be a large step for a Jewish author working in the Babylonian cultural orbit to place Gilgamesh among the Nephilim, the mixed-blood giants of the biblical tradition. Another possibility, and this is where Millich's 1976 work became controversial, is that the relationship between the Book of Giants and the Gilgamesh epic is more direct and more substantial than mere name borrowing. Milich argued that the Book of Giants was composed in a Babylonian environment, possibly by Jews living in the diaspora, and that its author was in conscious dialogue with the Mesopotamian epic tradition. In this reading, the Book of Giants is not just borrowing names. It is rewriting the Gilgamesh story. It is taking the hero of Mesopotamian tradition and recasting him as a villain of Jewish apocalyptic tradition. Not the searcher for immortality, but the child of transgression. Not the builder of Uruk, but the destroyer of the pre-flood world. This would make the Book of Giants one of the most sophisticated acts of intertextual polemic in ancient literature. A Jewish author living in the shadow of Mesopotamian culture, taking the greatest hero of that culture and saying, "No. In our tradition, your Gilgamesh is one of the Nephilim. He is not the hero who overcame death. He is one of the condemned who could not escape it." But there is a complication, and it is a beautiful complication, the kind that keeps scholars awake. The Gilgamesh of the Book of Giants is not simply a villain. Like Ohya and Hahya, he appears to be a participant in the dream assembly, one of the giants trying to make sense of the visions, one of the beings reaching toward Enoch for interpretation. He is caught in the same trap, the same nightmare, the same desperate search for meaning. If the Book of Giants is a polemic against Mesopotamian heroic tradition, if it is saying that Gilgamesh was really just one of the doomed giants, why does it give him the same interiority, the same dreaming, the same reaching toward understanding that it gives to the sons of Semyaza? Perhaps because the Book of Giants is not ultimately a polemic at all. Perhaps it is something stranger and more generous. A text that looks at all the great figures of the pre-flood world, whatever tradition they came from, and asks the same question about all of them. What did it feel like at the end? What did they dream in the dark before everything was taken away? The Gilgamesh epic, for all its grandeur, ends with resignation. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, touches the walls of his city, and recognizes that the walls are his immortality, the works of his hands, not the life of his body. The Book of Giants offers no such consolation. There are no walls to touch. There is only the dream and the messenger, and the answer that the messenger brings back, and the silence that comes after. This is the story of the Manichaean Book of Giants, and it is one of the strangest and most illuminating stories in the entire history of suppressed knowledge. Manichaeism was a religion founded in the 3rd century of the Common Era by a Persian prophet named Mani. Mani created an elaborate cosmological synthesis that drew on Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Buddhism, and aspects of Jewish apocalypticism into a single unified system. His goal was a universal religion that could be carried across every cultural boundary. Manichaeism spread with remarkable speed. Within decades of Mani's death, he was executed by the Zoroastrian establishment in 274 CE. His followers had carried his teachings east through Persia, into Central Asia, into China, west through the Roman Empire, North Africa, Spain. For several centuries, Manichaeism was one of the most widespread religions in the world. And among the texts that the Manichaeans carried with them, translated into Parthian, Sogdian, Coptic, and eventually Chinese, was a version of the Book of Giants. The Manichaean Book of Giants was discovered in the Turfan Oasis in what is now the Xinjiang region of China during German archaeological expeditions in the early 20th century. These fragments, in multiple languages, were brought back to Berlin and sat in scholarly collections for decades before their connection to the Qumran material was recognized. Why did Mani preserve the Book of Giants? This is a question with a fascinating answer. Mani was not simply borrowing a Jewish text. He was a religious genius with a clear theological program, and the Book of Giants fit his program almost perfectly. Manichaeism is a radically dualistic religion, a cosmic war between light and darkness, spirit and matter, the divine and the demonic. The story of the Watchers descending and producing monstrous offspring was, for Mani, a mythological expression of the contamination of spirit by matter, the mixing of the divine with the earthly that his entire system was devoted to undoing. Mani also, and this detail matters, believed himself to be a prophet in a lineage that included Enoch. In Manichaean tradition, Mani was the final prophet, the seal of the prophets, the one whose revelation completed and fulfilled all previous revelations. Enoch was part of that lineage. The Book of Giants, in which Enoch is the central interpretive authority, the one human who can read heaven's language. This was exactly the kind of text Mani wanted to preserve. So the Manichaeans kept the Book of Giants. They translated it, they copied it, they carried it to places no Jewish text had ever gone, into the Central Asian trade networks, into the corridors of the Silk Road, into communities that had never heard of Qumran, or the Watchers, or the Hebrew flood narrative. And when Judaism and Christianity, each for their own reasons, allowed the Book of Giants to drop out of their traditions. The Manichaeans held it. Why did Judaism not preserve the Book of Giants in its mainstream tradition? The formation of the Jewish biblical canon is a complex and still debated process. But by the first few centuries of the Common Era, the boundaries of the Hebrew Bible were being drawn, and texts like 1st Enoch, Jubilees, and the Book of Giants were left outside those boundaries. The reasons are multiple. The rabbinic tradition that emerged after the destruction of the temple in 70 CE tended to be cautious about apocalyptic literature that placed too much emphasis on angels and cosmic intermediaries rather than Torah and Halakha. The Enochic tradition, with its fallen angels, its heavenly journeys, its astronomical speculation, was viewed with some suspicion. Why did Christianity not preserve the Book of Giants? The early Christian canon was similarly selective. The Ethiopian Christian tradition did preserve 1st Enoch, which is why we have the full text of the Book of Enoch today. But even there, the Book of Giants was not included. The Ethiopian canon seems to have followed a version of 1st Enoch that did not include the Book of Giants as an integrated component. This raises a question that has no clean answer. Was the exclusion of the Book of Giants deliberate? Was there something about its theological content, the sympathy for the Nephilim, the interiority of the condemned, the disturbing implication that the monsters had prophetic dreams, that made those drawing canonical boundaries decide to leave it out? Or was it simply an accident of survival and transmission? A text that happened to fall through the gaps? The Manichaean preservation suggests that the Book of Giants did not lack for readers who found it meaningful and worth keeping. It was not lost because no one cared about it. It was carried across the world because people found in it something valuable. And then the world moved on, and the people who valued it were persecuted and scattered, and the text went underground, into the fragile jars of Qumran and the damaged fragments of Turfan, waiting for 20th century archaeologists to find it. The work of reconstructing the Book of Giants from its surviving fragments is a scholarly puzzle of formidable complexity. The Qumran fragments come from at least 7 separate manuscript copies, but they do not overlap in ways that allow for clean piecing together. Instead, scholars are working with edges, with half-sentences, with words that could belong to several possible narrative positions. The Manichaean version complicates this further. It is not a direct translation of the Qumran text. It has been adapted, expanded, and modified to fit Manichaean theological concerns. Some elements of the Manichaean Book of Giants do not appear in the Qumran fragments at all, and scholars debate whether these are original elements of the Jewish text that happen not to survive in the Qumran copies, or Manichaean additions to a text they were reshaping for their own purposes. Loren Stuckenbrook of Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich has done the most thorough modern scholarly work on the Reconstruction, and his analysis is both precise and appropriately humble about the limits of what can be known. What Stuckenbrook and others have established is roughly this: the Book of Giants was a substantial text, not a fragment or a marginal note, but a developed narrative of significant length. The surviving material represents a fraction of the original, but a fraction rich enough to establish the text's main narrative arc, its central characters, and its theological concerns. What we have, the dream sequences and their discussion among the giants. The assembly of giants deliberating. The mission of Mahaway to find Enoch. Fragments of Enoch's response, his interpretation of the dreams, and his pronouncement of doom. Some narrative material about the violence of the giants and the misery of the pre-flood world. What we do not have, large sections of the Mahaway journey, the full text of Enoch's pronouncement, any narrative of the flood itself, if the text included one, the ending, whatever ending the text had beyond Enoch's devastating interpretation. That ending is perhaps the most tantalizing absence. What happened after the giants heard Enoch's message? Did they submit? Did they rage? Did they continue their violence in a kind of defiant despair, knowing it was futile? Did Ohya and Hahya say anything to each other in the dark after Mahaway came back? The fragments are silent on this. And the silence is its own kind of answer. There is no redemption arc. There is no last-minute reprieve. What Enoch told them is what happened. The flood came, and the giants were destroyed, their spirits becoming the demons that wander the earth in later tradition, unable to eat, unable to rest, condemned to a kind of existence that is worse than non-existence. The Book of Giants begins in nightmare and ends in the abyss before the nightmare comes true. It does not resolve, it does not console. It simply makes you feel, for a moment, what it was like to be on the other side of a judgment you could see coming but could not stop. Is that a valuable thing to feel? The scholars who have devoted their careers to these fragments seem to think so. Here is what the text actually does, stripped to its mechanism. It takes beings that every tradition around it describes from the outside as problems, as contaminants, as the reason the flood was necessary, and it moves the camera inside. Not to excuse them, not to rehabilitate them, simply to show that there was an inside. That inside the violence, inside the transgression, inside the enormous bodies that the earth could not contain, there were dreams, there was fear, there was the reaching toward of something trying to understand its own situation. That is a theological act, not just a literary one. Because the moment you grant interiority to the condemned, you have introduced a question the system of judgment prefers not to answer. What does the condemned experience of judgment tell us about the justice of the judgment itself? The Book of Giants does not answer this. It is too honest to answer it. What it does instead is hold the question open for the reader, for the listener, for the tradition, and refuse to close it cleanly. The flood comes. The giants are destroyed. Their spirits become the demons that haunt later tradition. The sentence is carried out. And none of that resolution removes the image of Ohya waking from his nightmare. It does not remove the assembly of giants trying to reason through their dreams. It does not remove Mahaway, crossing the world, to find a human who could read heaven's language, not to beg for mercy, but simply to ask, is this real? Is this what we think it is? The answer was yes. They asked anyway. This is not a small shift. In the theology of the period, giving the condemned an interior life was theologically dangerous precisely because interiority is the precondition for sympathy. You cannot sympathize with something that has no inner experience. The moment you give the Nephilim dreams, prophetic dreams no less, you have opened a door that the official tradition preferred to keep closed. Sympathy for the monster is threatening to systems of cosmic justice because it raises the question of whether cosmic justice is just. If the Nephilim suffered, if they feared, if they searched for meaning in their fate, then the story is more complicated than they were evil and they were destroyed. And if the story is more complicated, then the justice that destroyed them is more complicated. And if divine justice is complicated, this is the chain of thought that the Book of Giants sets in motion, and that the exclusion of the Book of Giants was perhaps designed to prevent. But the chain does not stop. The question of inherited guilt, of being condemned for what you are, rather than purely for what you choose, is not a question that ancient apocalyptic literature invented. It is a question that runs through every generation that has grappled with how guilt travels through blood and history and structure. Children bearing the sins of their fathers. Communities carrying the weight of ancestors' choices. The born into nature of certain kinds of disadvantage and condemnation. The Nephilim are an extreme case, beings of supernatural violence, born from transgression, existing in a world that could not contain them. But the extreme case illuminates the general principle. What does it mean to arrive in a world that has already written your sentence? What does it mean to dream of your own destruction and know that knowing changes nothing? The Book of Giants does not answer this question, but it asks it with a clarity and a compassion, even for figures it regards as genuinely destructive, that is remarkable for any century, let alone the 3rd or 2nd century before the Common Era. There is one more dimension worth sitting with, the question of what it means that even the condemned seek understanding. Mahaway does not travel to Enoch to ask for mercy. The giants, as best we can reconstruct from the fragments, do not seem to believe that Enoch can save them. What they want is interpretation. What they want is to know what their dreams mean. They want the truth, even if the truth is ruin. This is a profound act of the human, or the almost human, the superhuman, the condemned but dreaming. The desire for meaning does not stop at the edge of doom. The giants are having nightmares that no one can read, and their response is not to simply continue their violence in ignorance. Their response is to send a messenger, to reach out across an impossible distance toward the one being who might be able to tell them what is real. And Enoch tells them, the answer is ruin, but they asked for it. And in the asking, in the reaching toward meaning, even when meaning brings only confirmation of catastrophe, there is something undeniably recognizable. Something that looks at its core unmistakably like us. In the end, the Book of Giants survives in pieces, edges of sentences, half a name, the ghost of a narrative that once had a beginning, a middle, and an ending we cannot fully recover. Scholars continue the reconstruction work. New computational tools allow for analysis of the fragments that was not possible in Millich's era. Stuckenbrook and others continue to refine the reconstruction, to argue about which fragments belong where, to debate the relationship between the Qumran text and the Manichaean version, and what the differences tell us about the history of the tradition. And the questions the text raises remain alive in a way that the text's centuries of obscurity have not diminished. Why does sympathy for the condemned feel theologically dangerous? Why has every tradition that engaged with this story, Jewish, Christian, Manichaean, had to decide whether to include it or exclude it, whether to sit with its implications or redirect attention elsewhere? What does it mean that a text giving interiority to the enemies of God has had to travel underground, through apocalyptic communities, and Central Asian deserts, and turfen oases, and Judean cave jars to survive at all? And what does it mean that it did survive? The fragments came out of the caves in 1947, and they are with us now. The Book of Giants cannot give us the ending it originally had. It cannot tell us what happened after Mahaway returned, what Ohya and Hahya said to each other in the dark after they knew the truth. But it can give us the dreaming, enormous figures lying in restless sleep, their massive forms curled against a landscape that is too small for them, their faces twisted with visions they cannot escape. Above them, heaven is silent. Around them, the world they have ravaged waits. And somewhere beyond the horizon, a small human figure holds the key to what their dreams mean. He already knows. The answer is ruin. But they asked, and somehow, against every probability, through every attempt to silence it, the asking survived.